Okay, hey everybody, welcome to another episode of On the Wrist from Off the Cuff. Today we have a really cool review for you from the brand AVI-8. This is actually the first AVI-8 watch that I've reviewed on the channel. They're essentially a sister brand to Spinnaker, but basically instead of that nautical and diver-oriented theme, AVI-8 definitely focuses on the aviation and pilot style watch side of the house. Now, I've had my eye on AVI-8 for a while, and I was really excited when I heard about this particular release because I think it's a really nice pilot's watch. I think it's pretty well-rounded and has a lot to offer, and it's actually super affordable, very much in the same vein of Spinnaker watches. Now, some key common characteristics and design language when you're looking for a pilot's watch. Really, the key here is finding that balance of legibility and functionality, which I think AVI-8, not Spinnaker, does a really fantastic job with this particular model. This is their Flyboy Engineer Automatic, and this particular color scheme is known as the Mitchell. Now, the reason why they call it the Engineer is because of that Engineer bracelet, as you can see, which I think ties in really nicely. And that's something, for me anyway, is a huge treat when you're looking at a pilot's watch. If you can find one that comes on a nice steel bracelet, then it's really such a huge bonus. Although pilot's watches are typically great strap monsters, I think when you can find any watch on a bracelet, from the factory, it's always great because you always do have the choice later on of swapping out to any type of strap. So whether it be a nylon kind of NATO military style strap or canvas strap, or of course leather pilot strap, or maybe even something with rivets to be really reminiscent. So with all that said, let's go ahead and get this piece in hand for a closer look. All right, guys. So actually, before we get this piece up for a very nice in-depth look. Ooh, man, look at that dial. I gotta say, this dial is really nice, great texture as you guys can see, but I will warn you that in practice, this dial is much darker. Of course, the studio lights do a great job of lighting it up so you can see that kind of fume blue center, but in regular life, this is actually gonna render most of the time as a black dial. But one thing I did want to show you guys was, because of course this is my first experience with AVI-8, was this box. I think it's actually really cool. It reminds me of my old sea bags when I was in the Marine Corps, that green nylon, of course, and you got the very industrial style stitching. And then you even do, of course, you get the little symbology there, which carries over from the roundel that's decorating the crown. But I thought this was pretty cool. I was relatively impressed. Like, it's not some super expensive, fancy thing, but I thought this was pretty cool and really ties into the theme really well. So this is something that honestly, wouldn't look bad sitting on somebody's desk, and which can be kind of a thing, right? If you want to display your stuff. So I did want to share that with you guys because I do think that it was a nice cushion with a very nice box, and again, not all about the quality, but really about the theme and the execution. And I think that's really where they shine with this model, because really kind of what they were trying to do with this AVI-8 Flyboy, which is a long existing line from AVI-8. They really wanted to just have a reinvention of that true classic pilot all-around timepiece, which I think this actually does a really great job. And part of that is it having this stainless steel bracelet. I think that really helps with the kind of all-around nature, really making it a more well-rounded timepiece. As far as the scale goes and the sizing, guys, this thing is definitely classic pilot proportions. At 42 millimeters in diameter, it has about 13.5 millimeter height, which does include the crystal. Without the crystal, it's actually only 12 millimeters, so it actually does a really decent job of wearing relatively thin. It's not a chronograph or a diver, so it's not super thick by any means, but not super thin. I think it's just a really nice kind of balance of proportions from that standpoint. Now, the Sapphire is a single dome with inner air coating, so when you get it at really harsh angles, as you can see, there will be some forms of distortion because it's only domed on the outside and not domed underneath. If it had the double dome, basically domes on top, domed underneath, and it will remain more legible. The nice thing about when you do have a single dome is that you do get some basic kind of visual play, something like that. So I think that is kind of fun, can be. For me personally, I prefer either just keep it flat or give me a double dome. In this case, I think, you know, it's not the end of the world. It's not like it's a super harsh dome that's on here, which actually helps with legibility, as you can see, even at this angle. Still very, very legible. It's only once it gets really harsh before you start kind of getting really noticeable distortion. So still, as far as functionality goes, still quite legible. Now, the crown isn't a screw down crown, but it is this really great conical style crown, which is definitely classic to pilots' watches and aviation timepieces. It is signed with that nice roundel decoration, which, you know, you'll see on the sides of planes and everything if you look through the archives. The movement inside, although you can't see it, is actually, of course, the very reliable Seiko Instruments NH35. Which makes sense for the price. If I didn't mention yet, you can get these for $285 direct from AVI-8, which is, I mean, for a watch with Sapphire, you know, a steel bracelet, hacking hand windable movement, that's tough to beat, guys. I mean, you look at, you know, basically similar Orients and Seikos within this price range, and they're not going to be as well equipped. So I'll just throw that out there. Obviously, I love Orient watches, I love Seiko, but AVI-8 definitely, as far as this particular model goes, is quite competitive, and I think really make a strong case for, you know, maybe giving them a look before you kind of look at your typical Seiko or Orient alternatives. Now, the dial itself is really great. It has this cool matte fume style. It's very grainy, almost like you would expect on kind of the grip tape on a skateboard. So you do get those beautiful, you know, kind of granular textures there, and then you do have that fume blue dial, where essentially you're going to be having that gradation that starts from the outside, which is more black, and then it goes to the inside, which becomes much lighter, and eventually will appear as more of a blue. And you can also see that blue AR coating coming into play right there as it gets hit by my bright studio lights, but hopefully you're able to see the blue dial a little bit better. But again, in all honesty, this thing renders, if you're going to be at any type of like less than optimal lighting, it will render essentially as a black dial. Now, one of the nice features here and details is that I really like about this piece are that there are so many little just like nuances and kind of almost like little Easter eggs within the design. Of course, the basic layout is very similar. You know, you do have, but instead of the 12, you get a 0 there, which is unique. But you basically kind of have that Flieger B style, and then you know you have the different range. You have the 24-hour scale. You have the 12-hour scale. But then you also have some really nice crosshairs, which of course, you know, tie back in again to that aviation kind of cockpit theme, which I think is really interesting. You do have these really nice raised and printed indices. So you can see they're very three-dimensional when you take a look at them. So they're not just flat printed. So I think that's really cool. They're raised. I mean, it would be nice if they were just chunks of loom that were applied. They're not, but they are raised, and I think it does add a really nice dimension, especially with how grainy the dial is. I think having those extra steps really helps keep this thing looking very sharp. So I can definitely appreciate that. Also, as you look, you'll also see on the seconds hand, there's even a little kind of roundel, you know, bullseye like, you know, right there, design on the end, which is nice. You also do have that date at 3 o'clock. Nice complication, of course, and I think it's nicely framed, well integrated. It doesn't throw off the balance of the dial at all. It's much better than some kind of cockeyed in between 4 and 5 layout. I think this was executed just fine, and looks great. And I think as far as the visual weight, it's actually still quite balanced with the current layout as is. Now the hands are actually a nice matte finish to them. So the nice thing is when it comes to reflections or lighting, they still stay quite legible. They capture the light really well, but they don't reflect it, which is great. So you do have Swiss Superluminova. It glows green. They don't specify, unfortunately, which grade of Superluminova. I'd venture to say it's probably just C1. But, you know, let me know in the comments below if you think it could be something a little bit more potent or not. The water resistance on this is only 5 atmospheres or 50 meters, which is more than enough, honestly, for a pilot's watch. You do have a really, really interesting and cool stamped clasp, which does have a nice deep graphic to it, which I think is really cool. Of course, it's a little Flyboy, and I do enjoy that the actual finishing is quite different. It has this kind of crinkle finish, which I think is really handsome. And then, you know, over where you have the information on the case back, it's more of a, you know, satin blast. So I think it actually contrasts and reads quite nicely, and it does add a nice little bit of class there. Also, you can see for the bracelet, everything is solid, solid links, solid end links. Nothing crazy. It does still have push pin connectors in there. It has 22 millimeter lugs, so on the wider side, but this is a wider watch. So what I find is when you have a wider watch with wider lugs, then you get the taper. It actually does help the watch wear much better and look better. It doesn't look oversized as much. So I think this actually really helps with the proportioning by them sticking with that 22 millimeter lug width and having it taper down nicely. It does taper down to 18 millimeters, which is a really nice surprise, because typically you'll just kind of see 22 taper down to 20. Here, tapering down more dramatically to the 18, I think really pays dividends and makes it just adds a certain level of refinement and class as you do look at this piece. And another thing that's pretty nice is, of course, you do have a couple of micro adjust holes, so you can really dial this in as far as fitment goes. Very typical clasp here, you know, basic sports clasp with the double locking. You have the pushers, then you have the fold over clasp. So with all that said, let's actually get this piece on wrist and see how it wears. Alrighty guys, as you can see on my 7 1/4 inch wrist, this thing wears really well. I mean, it wears like a big sporty pilot's watch should wear. It should have some wrist presence. It should stand out. It should be quite legible, especially considering the amount of information and scales that are on there. And as you can see, it does render. You can catch a hint of that blue, but it really is more because of the lighting situation. I think up close you can see wears really nicely, not too long over the lugs or anything like that, so that's nice. And then you do have the nice you know, sweeping lugs there that do wrap around the wrist and guide the bracelet quite well. And then you even have these great high polished chamfers, which is another nice touch and something that, you know, for me anyway, I can appreciate kind of in any build, any genre of watch. You get those chamfers in there, it really just shows the level of execution and attention to detail that you're getting on the piece. So as you can see, I think when you look at that profile there, it's not like it's super duper slim or svelte, but I think it doesn't look like a big bubble on the arm, which is really nice. It just fits really, really great and looks like a pilot's watch should. So with that said, let's actually set up some low light transition and loom shots for you guys, and then we can wrap things up. Okay, we'll go ahead and hit the lights here. As you can see, the loom is actually quite strong, and I think it does have to do with how well applied everything is. I mean, it's not diver style quality by any means, but it does do a great job, especially considering what it is, which is it's a pilot's watch, so it doesn't really have to go crazy. And I think it's pretty nice that they do spend some time and get some attention there. Let me even do this and let me hit it with a little bit of black light to give you just a little more of a punch of how this is going to render when you really need it. Look at those hands. They definitely have little extra bite to them. And as you can see here, it reads really well. I like that you not only have those hour scales on the 12-hour, but you also do get some indices, which helps, I think, by having those extra kind of tick marks to look at, as well as, of course, that nice 12 o'clock kind of orientation. Now, another thing I really like to do during these loom shots is get some low light transition, because you're not always going to be out in the middle of a field getting some direct sunlight, which my hot studio lights actually do a great job of simulating. When it comes to daily wear, though, you're not always going to be in that type of lighting. Often you'll be in transitional lighting, and you'll be in some lower lighting indoors, coming in and out of a vehicle, you know, walking underneath an overhang. And then also what I like to expose is some really high contrast, some harsher lighting here, because what you can do is, one, you can see the textures on the dial really pop. You can see the color of the dial really pop, which is nice. But you can also take a look at that brushing. Look at the brushing on there, and as the light glides over the links. Now, on how uniform that brushing stays gives you a little bit of an indicator of how finely this thing is finished. And I think this is definitely finished right up there, and honestly well above its class, considering it's $285. So under $300. If you were to try to find something finished like this, full, you know, hacking hand winding movement, texture dial, great, you know, full loom on there. They're not skimping on anything. And then to have that nicely articulated engineer bracelet. Sure, it doesn't have the screw links and things like that, but it does have a lot to offer. And you can see even now the the camera is playing a bit more with the focus there versus the actual sorry about that, but the actual loom itself is actually still quite good. It was really more of a combination of the camera losing focus, so I can give it a nice little punch there. But let's go ahead and get the lights back on, and then guys, take a look at this real quick. See the dial? It's basically black. Till you get it right there, then you can see the blue. So that is something to keep in mind if you are just a huge pure blue fan. You might not be super happy with this. If you want something like that midnight blue, then this is definitely the thing for you. If you want something that's really super versatile, even probably more so than the black dial option, then this could really be the one for you, because it basically gives you a blue dial and a black dial in a roundabout way. Now on the wrist, of course, this wears like a pilot should. Great proportions, not too big, not too small kind of feel. As far as model variations go, you do get a black dial. There's also a blue or green kind of fume style as well, guys. I think the black dial is actually all black, so it'll look just like this, except it's all black. And then there are some tweaks, I believe, with some of the accent colors. And basically, each model of the three have different seconds hand decorations. So I think that's really cool and interesting. There's actually some really fun ones. This is probably the most sedate when it comes to the seconds hand decoration. But for me, I think the dial is just something that's really fun, and I dig that. Of course, blue sky, aviation, blue dials in general, I'm a big fan of. Now, as far as comparable models go, again, to kind of go back to comparing something similarly priced, probably your only real competition is going to be from Seiko or Orient. But honestly, at this price point of under $300, it's hard for me to think of something that's going to give you quite this level of value, considering you are getting a sapphire crystal AR coating, as well as, of course, hacking hand windable movements. And then you're getting a solid bracelet. And honestly, this bracelet is better than any bracelet you're probably going to find from Orient or Seiko at this price point. As you kind of climb up the food chain, you're going to get some nicer bracelets, but here, under $300, those bracelets are going to be pretty tinny, and honestly, probably won't even have solid end links. So I think that's really where AVI-8, again, very much like its sister brand, Spinnaker, where they really offer that nice bang per buck and make a real play for you know, for that kind of value proposition. For me, the bottom line is this is a really great entry-level pilot, and it's really one of the best under $300. I think they really nailed it. I from the packaging just to the theme of execution, it wasn't lazily done. This is something where you could tell there was a lot of thought that went into it, and they've built something that feels very cohesive, and I think falls within the brand of AVI-8 and you know how well known they are at this point as you know, kind of being the other side of the coin of the Spinnaker brand. So with all that said, let me know what you guys think in the comments below. If you liked the video, please do hit like, and if you haven't already, please subscribe for more content just like this. Thanks, guys.